Hello everybody, and a warm welcome from IRMSA's headquarters here in Johannesburg as we take another look at the local and the global risk environment. Why are we doing this? Well, all ahead of the release of the risk report from the Institute for Risk Management, and that comes out in February 2022. Joining me today, Kiren Maharaj, Managing Director at GIBB Power, also a President of the South African National Energy Association. Kiren, welcome to you. Let me start with a broad one if I can. The local and global risk landscape and outlook. It's changed dramatically over the past 12 months or so. What's your assessment? What have you seen?
Good morning, Jeremy, and thank you very much for this opportunity. As part of the South African National Energy Association, we have seen a very unfolding risk environment, and there's no question about it, the pandemic has really thrown us for a curve. One of the perspectives that we've taken recently with regard to risk is to look at the positives as well. So look at the opportunities that you can create around, mitigating and managing risk. And, we've been having many conversations as an association around those kind of issues. But then just, coming back maybe to what we've really seen, I think, the World Economic Forum warned in their risk reports as early as 2006 of a coming pandemic. And perhaps that's one of the risks that we, as people, just incur all the time, is that we see things and maybe don't give them enough attention. And I think that in itself leads us into a situation where the risk then materializes and we're on the back foot and we're having to perhaps mitigate it very expensively.
So the lesson here is to wake up a little earlier.
The lesson is definitely to wake up a little earlier. And if you really look at the risk landscape, I ventured to say, and I thought about this, is there anything left field? Is there something that we don't know? And, I couldn't think of anything glaring. What I think we've seen is a lot of risks that we've been talking about for a long time, gaining momentum, so their intensity, their velocity increasing, how quickly they can start impacting us and gaining intensity.
So everything from climate change
Yes.
to cyber risk.
Yes, if you go back 2-3 years, maybe 4-5 years, you look at risk lists published by various institutions globally that do this, you will see that they're on this list. And this is also something we found in the energy sector. So since 2018, we have partnered with IRMSA, actually collaborated with IRMSA to put together an energy risk report for South Africa. And, I hope that everybody's seen it. It's available free on the South African National Energy Association website. And it talks very much to risks in the energy sector. And if I look at the uncertainties that we identified in 2018 when we started the report to the list that we have now, I venture to say there's not even more than a 25% change. So the things that we've been talking about, the security of supply risks, the financial risks, the investment risks in the sector, the risks of parochial interest, not mitigating the key pivots like corruption, skills, creating a sound investment climate. These are things that have been prevalent for such a long time. So I venture to say that the risk landscape is not changing. Perhaps, and I hope that what has happened with this pandemic has woken us up. It certainly created a greater impetus in addressing consequences. I think that's why we have so many people questioning the validity of the vaccine, because it just came up all of a sudden, and yet previous ones took so long to develop. But I think it has shown us that we have the capability to respond and react very quickly to mitigate risk and to really create a sound environment in which to endure constant change.
So, Kiren, you talk about risk in 2022 potentially being just an amplification of what we have already seen in years gone by. But having said that, and perhaps parking the risk of the pandemic, what else is on the big radar screen?
So I think from what I've read and what I've seen, and I think this is enforced by a lot of the global research on risk, the climate change risk has now really gained impetus with the happenings at COP22 and the commitments that have been made by various countries, including South Africa, to undertake massive mitigation programs. I think it's one of the biggest issues on the agenda. I think one of the other issues for South Africa specifically would be this whole issue around, I think social justice, if I can call it, the haves and the have-nots, what the state can continue to support and what they can't. So this whole issue of social cohesion, and I think it's been very much, its profile has been very much impacted by COVID itself and the responses to COVID that we as a country have undertaken. I think this issue of social cohesion has become a big risk for the country, and maybe even regionally, and I venture to say perhaps globally in some parts of the world, specifically the developing world. So I think those two for me are potentially the highest on the radar going forward for 2022.
That disparity gap that you talk about needs to be addressed, obviously within the confines as well of challenged economies around the world, and particularly for developing countries.
Absolutely. For South Africa, I think it's a huge problem. We pre-COVID, we had a massive unemployment rate. Post or where we currently are, it's only gotten worse. Some of the constraints that we've dealt with. So if you look at the whole addressing of climate change and the mitigation of climate change, it's created the need for significant additional infrastructure. I mean, if you look at just the energy sector, for example, we're talking about massive rolling out of renewable energy projects and other alternative forms of energy, looking at storage, looking at electric vehicles. But it builds on the same issues that I think we haven't really dealt with. Comprehensive policy, creating a sound investment climate, having a good direction around where the sector needs to go and what it is we need to achieve. So those were already existing things, just in as much as the unemployment problem was existing. And if we don't change the way in which we implement and address this, if we don't improve on the collaboration and creating action, planning and creating action around putting these things in place, I venture to say that we're going to continue with this challenged economy and the challenged economic growth. Massive unemployment may continue, and then we find ourselves in a very socially tenuous position that could bring this whole economy to a risk.
Let me focus in on that word action, if I can, and wearing your South African National Energy Association hat. You talk about the climate change being a major risk locally and globally. I'm wondering to myself whether the energy industry in this country is getting to grips sufficiently with that risk, and whether the right management protocols are in place. Or do you still have some way to go? Because you're being judged more harshly now than ever before, given the fossil fuel debate that we see all the time.
Absolutely. So I feel encouraged because I think that the right conversations are starting. So just yesterday, for example, the CSIR, together with its partners, launched a report on looking at co-benefits for creating a renewable energy sector in Mpumalanga to replace Eskom's decommissioned coal fleet. And it's very encouraging that these things are starting to be looked at. And what was encouraging about how the study was done, in as much as there's a lot of statistics and information, it also talks about a lot of the things that need to be done and identifies, I venture to say, some of the things we've been talking about for a long time, but perhaps with these studies and the intended consequences being that these studies are going to be tabled to key policy and decision-making bodies within the government structures, local government and national government structures, as well as shared with business, it will create an environment in which action can be taken.
But action needs to happen sooner rather than later, given that the world is running out of patience here, and the planet itself is running out of time.
Absolutely correct. I think action needs to be taken. So maybe just to tell you about something that we've done as SANEA. So we started the risk report in 2018. And by 2020, after COVID, we decided, as I mentioned to you, we still had the same list of uncertainties, very much the same list of uncertainties. So we started to talk about, so what can you do about this? And we actually then based our risk work from 2020 onwards on an implementation framework for action, looking at implementation itself, impact, integration, innovation, and of course people. And actually putting together recommendations around, what are some of the key things that need to be addressed. And our latest risk report actually builds on case studies from entities, and I am happy to say there's several entities who've embraced the risks that the sector is experienced and started looking very genuinely at putting actions in place for this.
As long as there's an overhang of good policy.
And that is, I think, where, the long-term vision, a cohesive strategic plan that doesn't necessarily look only at the energy sector, but looks at all of the other supporting sectors as well as the services that are required to drive this, and create actions around bringing all of this together and addressing the levers, the enablers, skills, investment. And a big issue is capacity and capability in public institutions to be able to execute on these large plans. We have a good track record in the energy sector of having done that. I mean, we've run an IPP program for 10 years. We've seen a large rollout of projects. So there is the capability to do it, but I think it needs to be underpinned by focus, and it definitely needs to be underpinned, as you said, by good strategic vision, knowing what we want to do, knowing where we want to take the sector, and then empowering the entities that can deliver with good actions, with the ability to deliver it,
in other words,
and then measure the outcomes.
Pushing the debate into overdrive, and I'm glad you raised it, making sure that there is decent measurement capability around that. I want to go right back to one of the points that you made at the beginning of our conversation about looking at global risk and seeing opportunity. That's encouraging. How do you look for the opportunity, and how do you act on it?
So I think, our tendency around risk has always been to mitigate and to get ourselves out of the consequence. And, there are certain risks that you can't escape that, and you have to insure yourself and, make sure that you can be compensated for it. But we need to change that mindset. So we need to look at a risk and say, okay, mitigation means X, Y, and Z, and I'm comfortable, and I'm back to the equilibrium position. It brings me kind of back to where I was. But if I did something differently, what it is I could do differently that would take me, to a different perspective. And I think that one of the important things about looking for opportunities and changing risks into positives is that it requires good collaboration between the private sector, the public sector, society, the financing institutions to bring together what are some of these best actions that can be taken. And it may also require a different perspective. So maybe the financing entities have to come in with a little bit more open-mindedness or a little bit of a different way in which they normally work to be able to encourage these opportunities. So, if I take just for example, the mining sector. So we obviously have a huge challenge with the coal mining coming to an end. But equally well, we have this energy transition with a whole lot of new energy technologies that are emerging. And the question would be, rather than say coal is a sunset industry, it's going to come to an end, and ask the big question about, what happens to livelihoods and that, the question, the alternative perspective would be, what else can we mine? What else can we contribute to this changing energy economy? What else can we use the skills that you have in the mining sector for in terms of other types of industrial development? And I think those are some of the key thought starters in looking at risk more positively.
Kiren Maharaj, I want to end with this. You are the president of the SA National Energy Association. You are the managing director of GIBB Power. Risk is at the forefront, to the very center, should I say, of what you do. As a risk officer, whether it be in the energy sector or any other sector, and it is a philosophical question, how does risk thinking and approach need to change this year? You've spoken about how the pandemic has altered the environment. So how does the thought process need to change?
So Jeremy, in as much as I like you calling me the president, it sounds very nice. I'm actually the chairman.
Okay. Well, you've just been given a promotion.
Yes,
okay,
I like it very much. Thank you. Risk thinking for me, it's always, as you said, it's very philosophical. And I have to say, as South Africans, we tend to be risky. We do not cross when at a pedestrian crossing. We'll cross in the middle of the road where it's full of cars and take a chance. And I think we inherently have this
it's in our DNA.
Yes, of taking risk.
A little more appetite, a little more understanding.
A lot more appetite. And I think for me, that is something that we kind of reached a point where we need to start exercising that kind of view and thinking to the business decisions that we make. So do things that are a bit more bold. We've got COP26 came out with a very good outcome for South Africa, with funding being availed to unfold the project. So I think let's think big and bold. Let's do big and bold things that very quickly solve the constraints, that create good enablers for us to be able to roll out this infrastructure. And if you look at the thinking around the infrastructure plans that need to be put in place to mitigate the climate change issues, it ticks all the boxes of all the other things we need to address: grow the economy more than anything else, create jobs, improve the situation with human conditions, alleviate poverty. So it really gives us an opportunity to tick a lot of boxes, and I think it's really time to be bold, forget about the conservative business approach, and maybe try and do something a little bit different from what we've done in the past for a different outcome.
But not wishing to sound too risk averse, as long as that thinking is rooted in the principles of judicious management and good governance.
Well,
that's a given, isn't it?
Governance and judicious management are two of the most, I think, just addressing the issues around corruption, not allowing continuing to propagate opportunities to shift things in the way that they shouldn't be shifted, is absolutely key to whatever we do in the future. And it will also ensure that the benefits of what we do go to where they belong.
Kiren,
in the right places.
I'm going to thank you for joining us, MD GIBB Power and Chairperson of the South African National Energy Association. Thank you very much for joining us. The insight is valued.
Thank you very much, Jeremy.
And just to remind you again that IRMSA Risk Report 2022, it is a vital piece of documentation, an important primer as you approach your risk mitigation strategies during the course of 2022, will be out at the end of February this year. Thanks for watching.